Hello everyone, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at my top 10 favorite tarot and oracle guidebooks and why. So I got this idea because last week I was filming a video and one of the things that I was saying about that particular deck was that the deck may not have been, let's say, a groundbreaking deck, but the guidebook was exceptional. And one of you actually reached out to me in the comments saying, why don't you do a video in which you show something similar? So basically the guidebooks that made you want to keep the decks because of the guidebooks themselves, and not specifically because of the decks. I think that this is a really interesting concept, and I know that many of us, especially when it comes to tarot readers rather than tarot collectors, we actually do that. We do judge the guidebooks that come with the decks. So when it's a collectible item, we don't necessarily worry that the guidebook needs to be at a high standard. But when you're a reader, you definitely want to have something to base your knowledge on. And I'm not necessarily referring to any kind of Tarot 101 guidebook, as in something that teaches you how to read tarot in general. What we want to do is get into the mind of the creator of one particular deck and try and understand what they were thinking, what their thought process was when they created that deck. So today I'm going to show you 10 guidebooks. There's basically 8 tarot decks and 2 oracle decks. And then we're going to have also an honorable mention because I really wanted to talk about another deck, but then I realized that I was filming another video that was basically going to be almost 50% about that deck. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to include it, but it's going to be a number 11, so it's not going to be in the top 10. So let's start now, and apologies about my voice. I am still a little bit sick. It is funny because I was talking to a friend of mine. She was saying, she lives in Italy, and she was saying, we all have the flu. And I'm like, yeah, the flu is circulating here in Australia as well. And she was like, how is that possible? It's summer. And I said, well, it doesn't really matter for us. Yes, we do get the flu in summer because we have a lot of tourists coming over from Europe, or in any case from the Northern Hemisphere, and they bring about, obviously, the viruses. And so I know that it sounds really weird because if you ask anyone else on the Northern Hemisphere, no one has the flu in summer. But in Australia, it is actually quite popular. It is very, very common. And so I don't think I had this specific virus. I just had a normal flu, but my voice is still a bit strained. So I'll do my best to make it sound as clear as possible. So I'm going to start with a couple of decks that focus on the concept of goddesses, because I think that that is an extremely interesting topic. It is fascinating the way in which both tarot and oracle creators have approached the concept of goddesses and mythology throughout the centuries. And I'm very curious to see what they decide to write about, because the thing with such a vast theme as mythological goddesses, of even if you narrow it down to one specific area, it could be Greek mythology, for example, or it could be Egyptian mythology. The problem with that is that you find yourself going through probably hundreds of books of research done, and you cannot write a 1,000 pages long book for a deck. So you necessarily need to make a choice. And so that is where I find it interesting. I find it interesting to see what a creator decides to keep and what they decide to let go. So I'm going to start with an oracle deck. And it's this one here. This is the European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle deck by Johanna Pola. Johanna was so lovely. She reached out to me before the Kickstarter campaign. She said, I would like to send you my Oracle deck and a book for you to show it on your channel. And so this that I have in my hands here is actually a prototype deck that she said to me before the Kickstarter campaign. I know that then the Kickstarter campaign was very successful, and there was also some modifications done to the cards. In particular, I believe the cardstock is different. But I don't mind because it is still really beautiful. And to be honest with you, this is a very nice cardstock. I mean, I am stoked to have this copy. It's very sturdy. I believe it's got a black core, German cardstock. It is semi-gloss, as you can see, so the cards actually glides really well. It is fantastic. So I am very, very happy with this one. So this one came with a little white book, which I think it's still very nice, but the amazing thing that Johanna has done is to release this guidebook as well, together with the deck. So this was, I believe, an add-on or something like that. So you could choose to back just the deck with a little white book, but you could also add on this book. And this is amazing. So let me just show you the cards first. And let me just zoom in a bit because otherwise we can't see them properly. And then we're also going to have a look, of course, at the guidebook. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that the guidebook for this deck actually belongs to the title. It belongs to my top 10 favorite guidebooks of all times. So when it comes to the art style, it's really beautiful. I don't know if you've seen this deck around. I believe it has already been delivered when it comes to the Kickstarter campaign rewards. And I've seen a lot of people using it, perhaps, because we have so many decks coming in. I love that there is also some type of diversity when it comes to age, for example. And I was reading about this deck, and Johanna was explaining that obviously she decided to be true to the geographical area where these goddesses were worshipped. And so, for example, obviously, if we're talking about Eastern European goddesses, then you will have the Eastern European phenotype. And the only diversity that we can find when it comes to this type of origins is of age or body shape, of course. But being these close-ups, you can't necessarily see any kind of diversity when it comes to body shape because you don't necessarily see the bodies. But you do have some, although this is absolutely gorgeous. I really love this card. So this is a really beautiful deck. As I said, I believe that it's not just the art style that makes it a great deck, because obviously it is beautiful, aesthetically speaking. And as I was saying in another video, yes, of course, I'm not fooling anyone. Of course, I look at the aesthetics. Of course, I look at the cards. Of course, I try and decide whether I want to buy a deck or not, depending on whether I'm going to like the images. I mean, it is obvious, isn't it? We want to feel a certain way when we look at certain images. Sometimes I will look for a very confronting image because I want to do a certain type of work, but more often than not, I would actually prefer to look at an image and feel good about it. So let's just have a look at the guidebook, because that is the protagonist, let's say, of this video today. And sorry, let me just remove a couple of leaflets here. So this is a fantastic book. This is called a companion book, so it's not necessarily what we would call a little white book. But then again, today, I don't think, I'm just gonna look quickly around me, and no, I don't think I have any little white book. It's not that I don't think that little white books, the ones that come with the deck inside the tag box, for example, cannot be interesting. For example, the Ghosts and Spirits Tarot, published by US Games by Lisa Hunt and created by Lisa Hunt. That one comes with a little white book, and it's a good enough because it explains all of the myths and legends that you will see portrayed in the cards. But that is not necessarily what we have a look here today. So I'm literally talking about actual guidebooks, as in actual books, and sometimes they're also called companion books. So this one is in a full color, as you can see, and you do have a reproduction of the card on a full page. So this is actually really amazing. And you know, this was one of the reasons why I, let's say, wanted to do this video, is because one thing is talking about really good guidebooks that present you with a lot of information about the cards. And one other thing is talking about a really good companion book that could actually stand alone. So I have been asking myself, when going through all of these decks, I've been asking myself, would I keep the guidebook if I didn't have the deck? So if I one day went to the extent of rehoming a deck because of whatever reason, would I still want to keep the guidebook? Obviously, I wouldn't do that, because if it's a deck that is sold with the guidebook, I will have to sell the guidebook as well. But you know what I mean? For example, in this case, this guidebook was not necessarily the one that came with the deck, so it was an add-on. So if one day I would decide to rehome this deck, I would definitely ask myself if I want to sell it together with the book or not. And this is definitely one of those books that I would want to keep. So it is really beautiful, but that is not necessarily the main reason why I want to keep it, but because of the information that these pages are giving me in regards to each and every one of these cards. So when we are looking at one specific card, so this is Mokosh, and then you have obviously the themes of earth, faith, life, weaving, time, sexuality, harvest, wealth, water, fertility. And then it talks a little bit about the goddess. So it's a chief goddess figure in several Slavic pagan cultures. She presides over time, home life, fertility, and the harvest. So you go on, and it gives you as much as information as you can pack into one page, because you need to understand that obviously when you do your research, you will see that even for deities that are not necessarily super well known or with a lesser known iconography, at the same time, there's still a lot of research papers and books done over pretty much anything in the world right now. And thanks to internet, we have access to that research. And thanks to the fact that we have, for example, Google Translate, even if that research is done in this case, in a Slavic language that we might not speak, we will still be able to read it because we will read it in a translation. So I really believe that this is, it takes, I think, an effort that needs to be appraised and needs to be commended. Because in order to get to write a page like this, Johanna had to study probably a couple of books for each and every one of these characters. And so it is very important to understand this. It's not just a matter of copy pasting. It's not just a matter of perhaps referring the oral tradition of some kind of news and fact that regard Mokosh. In this case, there has been a very deep, very thorough research done that then had to be summarized. And so we have it here. And then when we go to the other pages referring to that card, we also understand that Johanna had in mind the creation of an oracle deck. This is not just, or not only, let's say, a book about European goddesses and spirits. This is a book or a companion book to a deck, an oracle deck. And so you will see that I will say the same thing when it comes to other tarot decks, for example. Those are tarot decks. This is an oracle deck. The other ones are tarot decks. There is something to be said about the actual card. So in here, we have what Johanna was describing about Mokosh related and associated with the actual card, so creation. So we got the divination of the personal message that is themed around creation. So it will explain again some characteristics about Mokosh, but at the same time, it will tell you why, according to Johanna, this card can be seen, this specific goddess can be seen in this card in specific as the goddess of creation. And then you will have a couple of prompts here at the bottom. I don't know if you can see them. What are you grateful for today? How is your life better now compared to this time last year? Have you recently imagined a worst case scenario that didn't come true? What is a life experience, good or bad, that has made you a better person? This is It looks like it's only 4 lines, but to be honest with you, this is very thought-provoking. Seriously, try right now. I heard you. I challenge you to try to answer this question. Have you recently imagined a worst-case scenario that didn't come true? Why do you think that Johanna is posting this particular sentence and she made a choice? Because she could have asked a number of questions, but there's only 4. So obviously this one must have been important for her. So imagine what is the reason why she chose to ask you this? Have you recently imagined a worst case scenario that did not come true? Because she wants us to understand that even though we might live through a 9 of Swords situation in which we wake up at 3 a.m. and we think that there is a worst case scenario going to happen, we want to remind ourselves that that doesn't necessarily have to happen. It doesn't necessarily happen. So I really like this because the choices that go behind writing something as opposed to something else really tell me something about the creator or the writer. And then we go on, for example, this is a personal message, but then we look at devotion, inspiration for ritual, which is obviously taking you into, let's say, a further step. So you're actually being asked to be active. So think about a ritual, correspondence, connecting with Mokosh, soil. In her role as a great mother, Mokosh is an ancient deity that has likely existed since the beginning of time. And then it talks about how to connect with Mokosh. So you can integrate soil into your practice. I find that fascinating. I really love it. This is not just for those of us who think of ourselves as witches, for example, or as someone who has a really strong connection with Mother Nature. This is regardless of what our practices are. In my case, my practice is based on personal growth, self-healing, for example, and compassion. And I will always find a reason to connect to the resources that I have around myself, my house, the parks that are around it, the mountains, the sea, etc. So connecting with the soil, integrating soil into my practice is always welcome. And if that gives me the possibility also to connect with Mokosh or with what Mokosh stands for or represents, then even better. Not magic, for example. Not using Slavic magic in the creation of amulets, in ritual work, or spell crafting. This is extremely interesting because this is something I'm not well versed in. I don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge on not magic. I do find it fascinating. And so one day I will want to study something about it and get a deeper understanding of how it works. And so this could be part of my ritual as well. And then it says cat here. It says Mokosh is a goddess of the household, and as such a sacred animal is the cat. Koshka, the Russian word for cat, may stem from the same root as one of the goddesses' name, Makosh. So this is amazing because it also talks to you about the symbology related to a familiar. It sounds like a familiar, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't have to be because this is, as I said, this is regardless of what our own concept of, for example, the symbolism of a cat is. This is associated to this divinity, this goddess in specific, and it is something that Johanna wants to bring our attention on. And it really is the choice that she made that is relevant to me, because I could have read any book about Mokosh, okay, by any PhD, scholar, expert, you name it. But this is interesting to me because it's related to an oracle card and it's related to personal practice. So then obviously we're going ahead and there's pretty much the same kind of layout for each and every one of these characters. And I highly recommend it because, I mean, there is something to be said about this video. You please don't get upset, but I'm also going to show you a couple of out-of-print decks. And the reason why I'm going to do that, and I debated really hard whether I was going to do it or not, is because I believe that if I give you the possibility to look at these, you might still consider whether you want to get them or not. And sometimes you will see them selling for a certain price on a Facebook page or eBay or Etsy or you name it. and then you will, at least you will know by having it seen them here, you will know what you get for that specific price. That is the only, let's say, intent that I have behind showing you these out of print decks. This is out of print, it's not, but just to warn you, there's a couple of out of print decks. So the next deck is still related to goddesses, but it's actually a tarot deck. And this is this one here. It's the Dark Goddess Tarot by Ellen Lorenzi Prince. This is the mass market edition, so you won't hate me. It's not out of print. It's still pretty much available. It is printed by Red Feather. I think that we all know about this edition because it has the very infamous kind of titles that you can see here at the top. And unfortunately, these titles, they do cover part of the artwork, which is really a pity. I'm not necessarily a fan also of the arching kind of ribbon like that, but I would have been okay with it had it been outside of the artwork. But because it is inside, and on top of everything, when I get to the Baba Yaga card, I always say the same thing. You will see that it kind of clips Baba Yaga's hair, and I'm always like, would you really want to upset Baba Yaga? I mean, of all of the characters that you see in this deck, which is at least 78, if not more, Baba Yaga is probably the one you do not want to piss off. But anyway, let's move on. So this is obviously about all of these goddesses, but again, this is an incredibly interesting concept because it's not just the goddesses tarot. This is the Dark Goddess Tarot. So what we are looking at right now is a very specific choice made by the creator, Ellen, and she basically decided to have a look at all of these deities. There's obviously a lot more than 78, but she made her choice, and her choice was based on all of these ones that have a darker side to them, a shadow side to them. And this is the reason why I consider it extremely interesting, because it's not, let's say, just an overview of all of the goddesses that could be used in a card, in a tarot card in specific, because obviously the task was twofold. So Ellen had to choose not just darker kind of goddesses, so goddesses with a darker side to them, but she also had to choose them in a very specific way in order to make people understand how the association was panning out with the goddess and the card that they represent. So for example, the Two of Air, which is the Two of Swords, is Athena. Why is Athena representing the Two of Swords? We will see that later, because the reason why I'm showing you this deck is because of the guidebook. But I mean, I really do want to show you this deck. I mean, look at how beautiful these cards are. The colors are absolutely amazing. I know for a fact that the indie edition of this deck, especially the blues as a color, they were not as saturated. And so I'm actually kind of happy that I have this deck as a mass market. But I know that the indie edition is a fantastic cardstock. It doesn't have this ribbon, and it is really, really cool. So I'm actually looking out for it, and we'll see if I find it. So as I was saying, Ellen had a twofold task. She had to do a selection, and the selection had to show goddesses that have a darker side to them, but at the same time, she also needed to choose them in a very particular way because she had to associate them to the card they represented. So let's just jump ahead to the Two of Hair, because we remember there was Athena, and I really am curious about why Athena was chosen. I think I have an idea. But you see, that is the interesting thing. My idea could be completely different from Ellen's idea. And so reading about this in this guidebook, which by the way is not available, it was not available when the deck was produced indie. So obviously the indie edition, I believe it came with a little white book, but it never had this really chunky monkey of a book, which I really appreciate. And that is one of the reasons why this guidebook really has a reason to be in this tag, because this is a deck that if I got, for example, the indie edition, I would probably get rid of the mass market edition, but I would never get rid of this book. So Two of Hair, Athena, Greek goddess of wisdom and war. And we're starting already to think about, oh, maybe it's because, the Two of Hair is two opposite things, and you need to make a choice, and it's a very dire circumstance and everything. And you think wisdom on the one hand and war on the other hand. And, of course, if you find yourself having to decide whether to go at war or not, that may feel like a Two of Swords situation. Delay action only for good reason. And this is reminding you of the way in which if you wait too long to take a decision in a Two of Swords situation, you'll find yourself in a Three of Swords situation in which you have actually, unfortunately, succumbed to overthinking, overwhelm, and in many, many cases, you probably will have lost the battle if we are staying in metaphor. And then you look at this page, which is really well written, by the way. Kudos to the syntax and the prose are very, very fluid. Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war, guardian of the city of Athens. She stands on a pinnacle with her spear in one hand and her owl in the other. War and wisdom may seem contradictory, but the goddess does not delight in bloodshed. See, that is something that I appreciate. So if I had absolutely no idea who Athena was, and I had been given just this, so she's the Greek goddess of wisdom and war, and I was thinking myself, okay, well, she probably had a very contradictory kind of personality. She probably has a lot of a profound schism in her psyche because, wisdom on the one hand and war on the other, it almost feels like they're antithetical, because wisdom talks about time and taking time and being patient and knowing when to act. But war, on the other hand, feels like it's like an Eight of Wands kind of energy. So as something is very quick, very fast, very powerful, but at the same time, without knowing much the direction. But no, because she does not delight in bloodshed. So her concern is the protection and welfare of the people. And when she engages in warfare, it is for the advantages that the state can gain. So we now understand that there is a strategy behind that. We now understand that there is a lot of, let's say, intention. And we go on, and she's the daughter of Zeus and Metis, the most powerful god and the most wise of goddesses. Both qualities are found in her. She is called bright-eyed, great-eyed, and fierce or flashing-eyed. And so you understand a little bit more about Athena. You get to know her characteristics. You get to know also, let's say, it gives you the possibility to take one step further yourself and try and understand why Athena was chosen to represent the Two of Air. And then if you still didn't get it, because of course I still want to read some more, we do have the paragraph at the end that tells you how to read the card. So when Athena appears, give the matter a second thought. Impulsive action does not serve the greater good. However, do not get caught up with the rethinking. See that it leads you already into understanding that the situation needs to take, needs to go towards a resolution sooner or later, because otherwise you'll find yourself in a Three of Swords situation. When the same thoughts reach the same conclusions again and again, it is time for action. I love the way in which Ellen Lorenzi Prince has structured this book, because not only we get enough information about the actual goddess, so Athena, who she was, parents, etc., but also this is a brilliant interpretation of the Two of Swords. This is honestly a brilliant interpretation of the Two of Swords, and I just absolutely recommend this book. This is not even out of print. This is a mass market book, or rather deck, and obviously you get the book when you buy the deck. And it's on the pricey end, I would say, of mass market, but it is still very affordable. And it just, trust me, it is absolutely amazing. And for each and every one of these deities, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to journal. This one doesn't come, let's say, with active exercises like the Oracle did, so the European Goddesses and Spirits Oracle deck. But at the same time, this is a tarot deck, so you're actually supposed to use this for your tarot practice, within your tarot practice. Love, love, love La Llorona. I think that there's a book that I want to read. I forgot the title, but it's the let's say, a reimagination of the myth of La Llorona in a modern setting, and I can't wait to read it. It's obviously very, very sad. La Llorona is a Spanish word for the weeping woman. So this is the Mexican spirit of grief and remorse. And the story goes that La Llorona, we can imagine that La Llorona, so when we talk about any kind of legend or myth, we always refer to reality. So legends and myths are born because people see things with their own eyes that they cannot explain, and so they look to the supernatural in order to find an explanation. So this is probably based on a person, a woman, that after birth she felt postnatal depression, postpartum depression, and because of that, unfortunately, she probably did not receive any kind of support. And she unfortunately drowned her own child and her, actually, I believe it's children. So children. And after that, she was forever doomed. She also kills herself. She drowns them in a lake and then she kills herself, stricken by remorse. But she comes back and she's forever doomed to kidnap other families' children, other women's children, and to take them with her. But because she's in she needs to live in the water, unfortunately, those children were drowning as well. So it is a very sad story. And obviously, the association with the fire with water is a very interesting one, because it says, do not agonize over decisions made in the past, even those made out of anger or fear. It is done, and the past does not change, and you do not want to keep living there. The present holds the only potential for healing. Making a mistake once or twice does not make you bad as something forever. In the same but more serious vein, do not take temporary pain as proof of an eternal burden. The way in which Ellen expresses this concept is nothing short of amazing. This is a really, really an amazing book, so I highly recommend it. And in order to stay in a similar kind of concept, so this time we're not looking at goddesses, but we're looking at very famous or very important or fantastic women. And I'm talking about the R Tarot. This is a fantastic deck, I have to say. This is the mass market edition. This one has been published by Shipman. And no, sorry, the author is Sarah Shipman, but the publisher, who's the publisher of this deck? Okay, I don't remember this symbol. I actually don't think I have that many decks by this publisher, but let me just double check here. Because Harper Design. Okay, this is published by Harper Design. It is not a publisher I'm familiar with, but I am so very grateful to Harper Design for picking up and publishing mass market this deck. Because this deck originally came or was published as an independently produced deck, so Sarah Shipman made this deck. And I believe that, because I've actually looked into buying the indie edition if I ever find it. The problem with the mass market edition for me is that this is a tiny deck. This is really tiny. So just to give you one example, this is, for example, a standard tarot card. And let's have a look. And this is our tarot, so it's a tarot deck, not an oracle deck. And as you can see, not only the cards themselves are smaller, as you can see here, they are shorter. They are slightly wider, but they are shorter than a standard size. But the images on the cards is even smaller because of these chunky borders here. Now, this is an amazing deck, and let me just zoom in even further because obviously we're talking about a smaller size. So this is really an amazing deck. I really love it, and I think that the indie edition may have slightly larger images, but I was told that that is not the case, unfortunately. So I just decided not to splurge and go for the indie edition, even if I did find it, which is not necessarily a given. So this is obviously a collage deck, as you can see, and as far as collage decks go, you will probably think, okay, well, that's nothing new, it's a collage deck, there's the character on the card, and then we have the association with the card that they represent. And, you know, it's probably not one of those decks that, let's say, really wows you at first sight. You might like it, of course, because it is indeed aesthetically very pleasing. I actually really like the way in which the collage has been made. But other than that, we have a lot of collage decks, especially in the last couple of years. I feel like we've been flooded with collage decks, whether they're digital or manual collages, it doesn't necessarily matter. But the reason why you might want to get this deck is because of this. And let me show you. Chunky monkey of a book. Let me just zoom out because it is also slightly larger. So this is really, look how thick, how big this book is. It's really heavy. And this book is the reason why this deck, which is tiny, because we've seen that, needs to be stored in a much larger box, because obviously the book is coming with the deck in this case. So that's another reason why I highly recommend this, because obviously, you know, we have seen cases in which the book is an add-on, so you have to purchase a side, but this one is actually coming with the deck. So our tarot guidebook by Sarah Shipman, and for each and every one of those characters depicted on the cards, this is the same concept as the Goddesses Tarot, for example, the Dark Goddess Tarot. You will have a description of their lives, except that these are not goddesses, as I said. These are actually historical figures. These are women that have existed. And there's you know, all sorts of material related to them, so there's a lot of research that goes into writing these things about these women as well. Lucrezia Borgia, for example, she was born on 1418 and died in 1519 in Italy. And I am very familiar because she was an absolute. I know that there's a number of reasons why Lucrezia Borgia has a very bad reputation. I'm not gonna say whether I agree or disagree. I do believe, though, that she was fantastic because she was incredibly interested in the arts. She was absolutely, she had, obviously, coming from the Borgia family, she had an incredible amount of money. She was incredibly wealthy, and she used her wealth in order to make the Renaissance era prosper with the fantastic artists that we had coming from Italy. The reason why Italy is on everyone's map when it comes to art is because of people like her. Not just her, obviously, but also her. And so, regardless of the fact that she had a little bit of a bad reputation for other things related to her personal life, to be honest with you, those will not be scandals in our modern era anymore. So I really have a different kind of filter that I use to look at her. So she is absolutely amazing. And, you know, when you go through here, you will see that, as I was saying, when I was talking about Johanna Polle's Goddesses Oracle, there's a lot of research that's been done, and at the same time there's also the effort that goes behind choosing what to talk about and what not to talk about. And I'm very curious about the association with the Seven of Swords, because as you guys know by now, the Seven of Swords is my decan of birth. So I was born on the 17th of February, therefore Aquarius 3. And the minor associated with Aquarius 3 is the Seven of Swords. So I'm always been defending the Seven of Swords. So it would be very interesting to read out of all of this. And this is all historical information, of course. So what I want to talk about, though, is not necessarily historical information, because you can probably Google these kind of things and you will get twice as much information. What I want to talk about is every time you read something out of this book, at first sight, it will look like historical information, something that comes out of a book, of a manual, of history manual. But at the same time, there is always a keen eye, or there is always the attention over the association with the tarot card. So this is really interesting because we will know about Lucrezia Borgia, but we will also know about her association with the Seven of Swords. So if I remember correctly, there's a lot of pain here. There's a lot. She did go through a lot of grief, and that is also referring back to, I believe, the keywords here: upright family conflict, harmful secrets, betrayal, personal challenges, honesty, escape. There's a lot of grief that she went through, if I remember correctly. And obviously, when you look at her life, because of the time in which she was alive, it was incredibly, how should I say this, hostile towards women. And she had the possibility to change things, but at the end of the day, she made a few choices that, even though I believe there were there was there was this push to do some things that were not necessarily clean, but at the end of the day, she was an incredible character in history, and as I said, she was absolutely sponsoring the arts, and that was amazing. So in any case, I highly recommend buying this deck because, again, this is a mass market deck. It is, again, on the higher price end. See how beautiful it would have been to have the cards as big as this page? I mean, probably not as big as this page because that would be a huge deck, but at least slightly bigger than the small window that we've been given on the cards, because these are actually really beautiful. Octavia Butler, for example, born 1947, died 2006, United States. For the Three of Pentacles, upright, meaningful work, talent, discovery, writing, a burst of productivity, reversed procrastination, writer's block, discouragement. Amazing. I recognize all of this. The writer's block for the Three of Pentacles reversed, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic interpretation of the card. So this is another one of those books that if I somehow lost or rehomed or damaged the deck, I would definitely keep the book, because this is a book that we can definitely read by itself. We don't necessarily need the deck. I mean, obviously we want the deck, but we don't necessarily need it. I love that Anne Frank is representing a star card. Absolutely amazing, amazing. And moving on, I just wanted to show you another deck that unfortunately, it's a mass market deck, but unfortunately it went out of print a few months ago, I think about 6-7 months ago. And this is the Tarot of Vampires. This is because there's so many Tarot Vampires. Obviously, I need to specify that this is the one created by Ian Daniels. And this one is the one that has been released by Llewellyn. But that doesn't really narrow it down, because there's another Tarot Vampires by, I don't remember the author, I don't have that deck, but it's also released by Llewellyn. So it has to be the one by Ian Daniels. I don't necessarily know whether the other Vampire Tarot has an interesting guidebook. I do know about this one anyway. So this is definitely a deck that I would keep just because of the guidebook. I have to say, I like the deck, but this is not necessarily my aesthetics, because, and I know everyone will be clutching their pearls. Oh, what am I talking about? Of course it is my aesthetics. It is about vampires. I love the horror genre. I love vampires. Of course it should be my aesthetics. Yes, but. So I love vampire decks, but I love the vampire decks that are, how should I say this? That will fit in the horror genre, so that they're scary and not necessarily, seductive like this one. I really appreciate the effort. I really appreciate the artwork. It is beautiful. I like the atmosphere. This is a very dark gothic kind of atmosphere, and I really appreciate it. I like it, but again, whenever I look at the cards, I can't stop thinking that this looks pretty much like a fashion show that has been organized by, let's say, Versace for Halloween. So it doesn't necessarily talk to me about what makes vampires one of our favorite horror genre, because it's yes, of course, vampires are beautiful because they have this power of seduction. So of course there's a lot to talk about the sensuality of vampires as well, and I completely agree and I completely understand. And as a matter of fact, this looks a lot like what's her name, Mina's friend, I don't remember her name, but Mina's friend in Dracula by Bram Stoker, the movie, the one that actually gets seduced first and then she dies. And it looks pretty much like her. So I do recognize, a lot of the symbology, a lot, all of it, all of the symbology I recognize. But at the same time, I still think that it feels pretty much like, not even a Versace, but let me think. It could be a Dolce Gabbana. There you go. It could be a Dolce Gabbana deck. And because of that, I think that at the end of the day, I don't necessarily want to work with it. It is now out of print, unfortunately. I do believe that this is dependent on the fact that sometimes there are contracts that are not renewed. And so even though this is an incredibly popular deck, when the contract came up, it was not renewed, and Llewellyn decided to discontinue the production of this deck. I still keep it. I will always keep it. Well, first of all, because now it has become a collectible item, because you will see it selling on Facebook ads for like $200-300 Australian dollars, which is obviously a lot more than what it costed me when I bought it. I bought it when it was still available, of course. And I will have to say, I don't necessarily use it for divination because of what I said about the cards and the characters on the cards. However, even if I didn't have this deck, I would definitely keep the guidebook, because this guidebook is fantastic. Now, as very often happens with Llewellyn, you will have the name of the guidebook or companion book, which is actually different from the name of the deck. So the deck is the Terror of Vampires, but the guidebook is called Phantasmagoria. I believe that this is intentional because it really wants to show you that the companion book is a self-standing kind of item. But this book is fantastic, and I have to say I actually have 2 copies because I bought it. Someone was selling a very battered copy, and that's the one that I'm using. But this is amazing. It really tells you a lot on how to read tarot. It still refers back to the Tarot Vampire, the tarot in specific that comes with this guidebook. But at the same time, it tells you a lot on how to read tarot in general. So obviously, if you make the effort of creating or understanding the associations, you will actually get so much knowledge out of this guidebook. It talks about alchemy, for example. So I don't want to open or break the spine. And, see here, for example, there's a table, and it shows you the association between the major arcanas and the alchemical elements, and also the Kabbalah. For example, you have the Fool with the element of trump of air and the Aleph. So this is incredibly interesting. It is very deep, and as you can see here, if you had no idea about what this tarot deck is, which one it is, and you looked at this table, you will still have no idea of what this tarot deck, which one would it be, because as I said, it really gives you all of this information about also the court cards, for example, the suits. There you go. For example, here this is referring to the deck and walk. So we've got Aries with the Emperor, which is a cardinal fire. So cardinal is the position and fire is the alchemical element. The position is very important because cardinal sign, so we're talking about zodiac signs, and they're all of them, they are divided in 3 categories depending whether they are and in which degree of the wheel, let's say, they are positioned in. So the first 10 degrees, these are all cardinal signs. The second 10 degrees, they're all fixed signs, and the last 10 degrees are all mutable signs. So it is incredibly interesting to see these kind of references. You will learn about how to recognize which decan is associated with which minor card, because it then talks to you about the cards associated with that. Obviously, you need to remind yourself that these minors have been changed. The name of the minors have been changed. So knives is, for example, air. But as I said, really, really incredible. The chord cards, and then using Kabbalah and Tarot. And then it talks about obviously the tree of life and the paths. And it goes into detail about all of this. So it's not, okay, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that this deck, or rather this companion book, will give you a full knowledge of all of the disciplines it goes through, because honestly, if you want to learn about alchemy, Kabbalah, and the Decan walk, only 17 to 30, only 20 pages will never be enough, and we know that. However, at the same time, we can appreciate the fact that we've been given the possibility to have a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about when we're looking at these disciplines. And so if, for example, we're really interested by alchemy, then we will obviously do our own research and we will look for other books that will tell us a lot more. Then you've got obviously spreads. These are really interesting, by the way. There's a couple of exercises as well. Personal card portraits, the calling, the dynasty card. There's so much that is really interesting in here. So the birth date, so it will tell you the astrological aspect, the dynasty card, the bloodline card, the vampire court, and the vampire climb. So in my case, I was born on February 17th, so February 9 to 18. Obviously Aquarius, third degrees, so obviously third decan. My dynasty card, which is the major, is the star. My minor associated with the decan Aquarius 3 is the seven of knives, which is, as you remember, the seven of air. So L stands for Lord, which is a renaming for the king. So the Lord of Grail, GR is Grail, and Grail is the renaming for the suit of water. And the vampire clan is the knife. So you see, you can actually gather more knowledge about the deck itself, but at the same time, you will appreciate the knowledge that you gain about other disciplines related to tarot. Have I, let's say, if I didn't have this deck, would I keep the book? Absolutely. I mean, this is a treasure. This is absolutely a treasure. And I said, I'm sorry, unfortunately, this has become out of print, but it still sells in some tarot community or, Facebook pages. And now moving on to a deck that it is in indie deck, but it's still in print, and it is very, very easy to get. It's also very, very popular. And it's also one of those decks that, yes, it is an indie deck, but the prices are still very affordable simply because the creator is a lovely person. And I'm talking about Mary in the Sky, and I'm talking about the Gentle Tarot. So this is an amazing deck. This is one of those decks that I was hesitating in including into this video because it almost feels like I'm saying, if I didn't have the deck, would I keep the book? And in this case, it feels almost as if I'm saying that I don't really care about the deck. In this case, it's not. So I care a lot about the deck. I really love this deck. It's a fantastic deck, an amazing deck. It reads really well. It's very, very well balanced. I feel like if we can still think that it's an earthy deck, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards, but at the same time, it feels very, very balanced. I have a couple of editions that have also been sent to me by Mary herself when she was promoting her Kickstarter campaign, My Friend Fire, which is an oracle deck that is going to be the first installment of, let's say, 4 oracle decks in total, or maybe it could be 5, but in any case, it will be referring to the alchemical elements of fire, water, earth, air, and possibly also ether or spirit. This is a deck that we all know and we all love. It's a fantastic deck. It's so very natural. It makes you feel like we can actually look things right in the eyes and confront every issue that we may encounter along the way. I absolutely love the Seed of Cups because it's an otter. And let me just say, remember this word otter, because there will be an announcement that I will make very soon now, very, very soon in the month of March. So it is something related to otters, and I cannot say anything anymore. More than that, but keep an eye out for that. It will be something very, very exciting. So this is an incredible deck. I just absolutely love it. I love the fact that, this one is also the linen version, so it's actually a pleasure to shuffle. But this is the guidebook, and I believe that even though, for example, in the linen version, you still have access to these, which are, let's say, cards with the explanation on them. And in other editions, for example, there was a smaller guidebook that came with the deck. I believe that this one is fantastic and it is worth the price. It's worth splurging on because it's really enhancing the experience of using the Gentle Tarot. It's a really beautiful book. I really love this kind of soft cover. That at the same time, it feels almost as if it had a linen finish to it as well, even though I'm not an expert and I don't know whether that is actually a fact or not. But that is the feel. And it is really beautiful. It's in full color, as you can see. Of course, it is. It really reflects Mary's personality. It is as gentle, as kind, as beautiful, and it is welcoming. It's very interesting as well. So if we go and have a look at what this deck gives you and what this guidebook gives you, it is not just a welcoming hug, it is also a lot of information. So if you do not find the Tarot of Vampyres by Ian Daniels, this one doesn't touch all of these aspects, but it's an excellent deck in order for you to get an additional layer of information or of knowledge about the cards. It's just that this one does that in a slightly different way. So when we look at the Tarot of Vampyres, we feel that there is a very, let's say, airy approach to things. So it's a very mental, very intellectual approach to how to read tarot. This is a very intuitive approach on how to read tarot, and it still gives you an edge. It still gives you an advantage towards attaining the true meaning of the cards, as opposed to other tarot readers that mainly stick to one or two aspects of reading. So this is, you can see it here, opening intention, closing intention. It puts you in the right state of mind in order to receive the message from the card. And then obviously we do have the explanation card by card, and always the full color and full page card. I love that there is an affirmation for each and every card, as you can see, also not just for the majors, but also for the minors. For example, here we got the Harvest of Cups. Okay, this is a chord card, but for example, the Three of Cups together, all filled up. There is a very personal approach to the cards. Let me just read something very quickly because I really want you to understand what I'm talking about. I am the juvenile little salmon fish, letting my body drift perfectly downstream towards the big unknown. I surrender to the magnetic pull that leads my 5-inch fish body towards the sea. I am unaware of the many obstacles before me. I do not fear. I control my destiny. Here is the start of a journey. There is one direction, and that is your direction. The baby salmon does not hesitate in the same way that their DNA guides their life. Following your life path is also in yours. So there is obviously a very naturalistic, let's say, approach to tarot, but at the same time, because of a very direct way to address the reader, it invites you in. It invites you in the knowledge of this card, and also it invites you to understand what the card is telling about you. So, it really puts you in the card itself. I really love this one. And then it goes on and tells you the upright meaning, and then it tells you the reverse meaning, and then there's also a brief explanation about the art symbolism. While salmon often run, make their way from the ocean up through their river and into their lakes in sync with the high tide. The highest tide can often be in the middle of the night. Our full card depicts such a night. Cosmos have above are also in the water below to parallel the magic and cosmic trust of the two. So there's an explanation here, and it talks about the human condition and how do we compare with the effort of the summon. Amazing, really, really amazing. I absolutely recommend it. It is one of those guidebooks that honestly you could just have the book, even though I highly recommend having or getting also the tarot deck, because it is really worth it. But I really love this guidebook. But let's talk about another oracle deck, and this one is, let's say, a sister oracle deck to an oracle that is out of print. However, this one that I'm going to show you is not out of print, it's still available. It is a mass market deck. It is quite affordable when it comes to the price, and I'm talking about the Faeries Oracle by Brian Froud, and the text is by Jessica Macbeth. I know that everyone is saying the same things, and I kind of tend to agree. When it comes to Brian Froud's deck, you really have to have a strong stomach. And I don't mean to say this in the sense that the images are gross, absolutely not. It is a metaphorical way to express the shock. Can I say shock? Okay, it is a metaphorical way to express the shock that you can have by looking at the images, because many of these creatures are so out there that it is very difficult to understand what world they belong to. So in some cases, they will have really human-like features, but at the same time, they will have wings. So they don't necessarily present themselves as 100% fairies like we would expect, but it could be a hybrid between fairies and humans. And I don't know how else to explain this. But there is something else to be said about this deck. Whilst the other one, which is called the Heart of the Fairies, is a deck that is out of print and everyone is trying to get a copy because admittedly the cards are more beautiful, let's put it this way. When it comes to the guidebook or the companion book, this one is actually the better one, the best one. So this one is published by Atria Books. I hope that is still the current publisher, but in any case, this deck is still available. It's not the Heart of the Fairies. So the Heart of the Fairies, you will have seen it. It is a deck that sells for maybe $300-400 Australian when someone decides to part way with it. And it is very expensive. This is the mass market edition that is still available. Yes, it is. As I said, you really need to, I mean, there's a major difference between the character depicted in this card, Penelope, and the gnome that is depicted here. I mean, they belong to two different worlds to me. And I'm okay with this. And this one could even be a human because this is the fairy godmother. But if you look closely, the features are not that different from human features. And so we need to understand where the boundary is. And, and for example, this one, this is a really, really lovely human face. But then we see that she's got frog legs and also wings. And the same goes for this one and others. And I'm not going to talk about, the effect of this deck. I mean, sometimes we also look at cards that look almost like cosmic angels, like this one, for example, here, or this one, or this one. There's a few of them, as a matter of fact. And then other times we look at the cards and it looks like a human baby, a toddler, but then again with Spock ears and wings. I believe that this is expressing, this looks like the Fool to me. This is expressing the creativity that Brian Froud certainly has. And it's one of those decks that, because it doesn't necessarily have keywords, but it does have titles, we would definitely need to go and have a look at the book and what the book says about that particular card, because it's not something that you will be, let's say, easily associating. I love this card, which is also in the back, by the way. So I would say when it comes to the aesthetics, I am like everyone else. I actually do prefer the other deck that is now out of print. I do have it. I was lucky enough to find it for a very reasonable price. It's called the Heart of the Fairies. I do prefer that deck to this one. However, when it comes to the guidebook, I also am part of the majority because I really strongly believe that this is a much better guidebook. This is amazing. It's written in a very approachable way, and it is the amount of information that it gives you in order to be able to read the card is exceptional. But I will also say that at the same time, it doesn't just create an association for you within a keyword and the image, but it's also very interesting to read, I would say. So for example, in the part 1, this is really interesting because it tells you, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, it tells you how to relate to the cards, how to try and create this kind of association. Yes, it is here. Okay, I was looking for it. Okay, so look first at the card that appeals to you the most. So you go through the deck and you pick up a few cards, and the one that appeals to you the most, you just focus on that one. Look at it carefully and write down what you see there in response to the following questions. And then there's a number of questions that are actually really helping you go through the process of bonding with the card. What is the emotional atmosphere of the card? Does it seem peaceful, happy, sad, loving, lonely, friendly? What else? And so on and so forth. And so let me tell you, I've actually done this a few years ago when I first got this deck. I probably don't remember specifically the questions anymore, but what I do remember is my answers to these questions, which means that I will actually be able to read this deck even though I didn't have the book. Would I want to? No, of course not, because as I said, this is actually a very interesting book. And so it doesn't necessarily matter whether you have the deck or not. Once you get to read this book, you enter the realm of fairies in such a way that it becomes intriguing, it becomes fascinating, it becomes really interesting for you. And you want to have a full experience, and this book is definitely giving you that. So ethics, it talks about a number of things. It also gives you, for example, a few spreads and how to read them. And it is, as I said, it's one of those guidebooks that is very self-standing, at the same time, though, referring back to the cards. Introducing certain fairies. Reading the fairy cards, so the 0 card, the guide. Obviously, it talks about the cards because otherwise you wouldn't have all of these references. But it is really, really interesting. So for the singer of courage, bravery, sublimation of fear, moral strength. And then we have a little bit of an explanation. We talk about what this means for us in our lives and start a reading. So we talk about how to let's say, relate to the card itself. And then we talk about the reverse meaning. And there's also a quote from Brian. Really interesting. I will highly recommend it, especially because, as I said, this deck is still in print. You can still buy it for reasonable prices. And this is a book that if you're interested, obviously, if you have absolutely no interest whatsoever in the realm of the fairies, I would not recommend you this book, but if you are, this is incredibly intriguing. Okay, and I need to speed up because I just realized that I still have 4 decks and companion books to talk about. So I'm just going to speed up because otherwise we're going to be here for 2 hours. And let's face it, no one really has time for that. So the next one is a tarot deck. This is an indie deck that was the reward from a Kickstarter campaign from, I believe, 2-3 years ago. I'm not entirely sure. I did buy it secondhand, but it came that it was absolutely pristine, so I'm really happy about it. This is a really beautiful deck by Andrea Aste, The Book of Shadows, an alchemist story. So Andrea is an Italian illustrator and he's famous for his very typical style. You will remember that he's actually made a couple of other tarot decks, the Tarot Light and Shadow, and the Codex of Tarot or something like that. I do have the other deck that is out of print. The other 2 are mass market, so you can get them. And I'm hoping that this one sooner or later will be picked up, perhaps by Los Carabeo, because it would be really, really interesting. I absolutely love this deck because of the colors. I think that the color palette chosen to reproduce this deck is absolutely fantastic. I love the colors association. I love how brilliant they are. I love the saturation. I love also the fact that he's not shying away from, putting together a really bright orange with a really nice teal green. And it finds the right way to my heart. These are the colors that I love the best, and they are absolutely masterfully executed in reproducing these images. It's just an absolutely fantastic deck, and I really, really appreciate it. Having said that, this is your typical RWS in the sense that it's a clone, not the typical RWS. Let's say the art style is completely different, as you can see. And as I said, it is very recognizable because if you have the Tarot or Light and Shadow, you would definitely see the same style. Let's put it this way, would I have bought just the guidebook? Probably not, because I actually really love this deck. But if I didn't have the deck, I would not get rid of or reharm the guidebook, because this is a fantastic work of art. And as such, I consider that this is absolutely worth having. So as you can see, it's a hardcover book, and there is a concept behind this. You can actually check that out on Andrea's website. This book has been made with the perspective of someone who has found an older manuscript that tells you about the alchemist story. And it is a multimedia kind of book because, as you can see, it has parts that have comic strips like this one. There's interviews to famous personalities in the tarot world. There's also references. This is, I believe, the original deck that went out of print, which I have. And there's so much here that is incredibly interesting. It's obviously a work of art. It's obviously the fruit of a mind of someone who's extremely creative. And I am always fascinated by these minds, by these creative minds. The way in which Andrea has put up this book and the way in which he's describing the story, where he's being contacted by someone, being told, look, we found this manuscript, and he talks about tarot, and then, he does his own research and everything goes on in the story. It's it's really, really interesting. Obviously, you also have the description of the cards in here at the last part of the book, because it also is one of the many ways in which you can use this book is as a little white book, let's say, by looking at the cards. But why would you? Because it is so much more than that. I mean, this is an amazing approach to tarot because it really shows you the creativity of the creator, but also shows you a very specific way in which the creator is using tarot or is looking at tarot. Tarot, when it really is used well, will definitely be a tool for us to express ourselves. So this is a fantastic book. And as I said, I also really, really love the cards. So moving on to the next deck. The next deck is the Saki Saki Tarot. However, the book that I've got is not the original book that came actually didn't come with the Saki Saki Tarot. You did have to purchase it aside. The book, or the little white book that came with the deck, is this one here. So it is your very typical one. It does have some additional elements here. For example, you can see the zodiac signs and the elements, the alchemical elements and the planets. You do have some kind of numerological approach as well. And you have a little bit of everything here. As you can see, there's a few spreads. And honestly, I actually really appreciate the amount of work that it goes into compiling something like this. But what I'm talking about is the book that I actually got when Monica released the second version or the second edition of the Saki Saki Tarot, which is actually called I Am the Artist. And the book, the Essential Companion book, is this one here, which is playing with symbols. The Essential Companion book to I Am the Artist Tarot and to Your Creative Journey. So this is, obviously, it's not the same deck that is portrayed in here because this one is missing the heads. But this is my favorite version of the deck, I have to be honest. So this is actually let's say, my favorite one when I want to read with either one of them. I always choose this one. It's also because the cardstock in this case, in this deck, is phenomenal. And when it comes to the I Am the Artist cardstock, is actually not, it doesn't give me a very good tactile experience, or at least it's not as good as this one. And I really I've come to like the fact that these characters are headless. I think that all of us had the same experience. At the beginning, we were kind of complaining that they came this way because it looks like it's very difficult to approach. When you don't have a head, you don't have an expression on their face. And so it does become kind of difficult to read the card. But at the end of the day, when Monica finally agreed to reproduce the stack and slightly changed it and put the heads on top of the characters, I think that all of us reverted back to this stack because we just really prefer it the way this is. When it comes to the guidebook, I can say this is amazing. This is an amazing good book. And it's also, I would say, as it says here, the essential companion book to the I Am the Artist Tarot and to your creative journey. I would say Monica is, again, like Andrea, an incredibly creative person. And it really shows when looking at this book. So like we've seen in the little white book, you will have a lot of information here, just on a bigger scale, about Kabbalah, about alchemy, about numerology, about astrology, for example. And it's always really interesting because at the same time, it will revert back to pointing to various symbols that you can find in the cards. But it does give you, if you just want to have this approach to the book and not necessarily connecting it with the deck, it does give you enough to think about and to study. And obviously here then we talk about the cards, and there's, as you can see, there's a few pages about the cards. Now, I seem to remember that it was just for the majors. When it comes to minors, there's a little bit less. So we've got the Two of Cups here, for example. We still have a lot of keywords. We have the astrological influences. We have this kind of associated with the art from the artist's journal. So it's almost as if you were reading the creator's journal. And then how to interpret the card in a reading, but I believe that that's it. Which is fair enough because, you know, otherwise this book would have been a lot bigger than it is. And it's always very interesting. And at the end, and that is something that I've done a lot, is the possibility to do a lot of combination with, for example, a 3-card spread. So you will see here, you have 1, 2, 3 associated to the column A, B, and C. And then you can use either past, present, or future, body, mind, and spirit, issue, advice, and outcome. Or like I've done a few times because I thought it was really fun, just choose one of these ones and randomly choose something from the column B and something from the column C. So I would go feelings, issue, and family, or a trade, advice, and end. So there's something that you can do, like some sort of an exercise in order to approach the tarot in a different way and create an even stronger bond with the deck, which I really, really appreciate. And there's also a lot related to color. So I don't know if I still have it, but there are a few cards that are actually blank for you to color them, I believe. And then you can do a lot of work with color. It's a pity that the book itself is not in color, because I believe that this would have been really interesting to see, because it talks about colors, obviously. But it doesn't matter. So it is an incredibly engaging, I would say, kind of book, because you read from the artist's journal, and then there's all of these references that you can learn, and there's exercises as well. It's obviously something that it's very full. It's a full experience, I would say. It's a full time and full experience that I really appreciate. We don't always have time to go through all of the knowledge that is written in these books, but when you do take your time, I will assure you that it really pays off. So this is an incredible book. I'm sorry, because I actually did not check whether this deck is still available or not for sale. It is an indie deck, but you can check out on sakisaki.com, and it is possible you might still find a copy available. Okay, now we're down to 2, and I have good news. So the next one is the Joker Tarot, and the good news is that even though this deck is actually the reward from a Kickstarter campaign from a couple of years ago, at the same time, I have just confirmed with Los Scarabeo that they're going to release a mass market version of this deck. I have no idea how it's going to, what's going to look like, and I have no idea whether they will give you the possibility to purchase the book aside. It is a possibility, but I don't know. In any case, this is an amazing deck. I really love Corrado Roy. Corrado Roy is the illustrator of this deck, but also the Murder of Crows Tarot, the Dark Side of Tarot, and he's also the illustrator of Dylan Dog comic books that I have been adoring and worshipping ever since I was a teenager in Italy. So this is, generally speaking, this comes also as a with a little white book, and I believe that this coffee table book or hardcover book did not come together with the deck, and I had to pay something aside, but it was very affordable, and I didn't mind because, as I said, I absolutely love this author, this illustrator. So this is an incredibly dark deck. Let me just put it this way. It is one of those decks that really will become confrontational because of, well, in many, many cases, because of the expressions on the characters' faces. There's a lot of really heavy cards. I'm going to be honest about it. In many, many cases, you will find yourself staring at these characters and think that they actually look downright creepy. And you will ask yourself if you want to go ahead and read with a deck like this. And truth be told, I actually do not read with this deck, especially when it comes to divination-related readings. I do, however, find this deck to be incredibly beautiful because of, as I said, I really like this art style. Corrado's art style is very specific. If you have the Murder of Crows, you will definitely recognize how it resonates. And I also believe that sometimes we need a deck like this. Sometimes we need a confrontational deck. Obviously, when I do use this deck, I would just use it for personal readings, and it would more often than not, it will be reading centered on a shadow side of my practice. So obviously, this is not a balanced deck. This is a darker deck, and it's a deck that will give you, as a consequence, some kind of a darker kind of reading. I mean, of course, we can look at all of these cards and we can see that really grim aspects coming out of all of these. However, I have to say the guidebook, or rather the companion book, is exceptional. I really, really love this one because when I saw it first, the only reason why I backed it or I paid extra as an add-on for this one wasn't because I knew what I was going to get, because I didn't. They didn't really explain what it was going to be about, and they didn't really give you a lot of images you can flip through. But at the same time, I always like anything produced or illustrated by Corrado, and so obviously I splurged on it. But now that I've got it, I'm incredibly grateful that I paid those 15 additional euros or something like that it costed, because this is an amazing, amazing book. So the concept of this book, obviously you have all of the cards here, but as you can see, if you're looking for a companion book that tells you how to read the card, you will be extremely disappointed because, as you can see, you don't have much, and the little that you have are actually quotes. So in the case of the Five of Swords here, we got a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that says, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving. So this is really interesting, but it doesn't really tell you much about how to read the card. And I would definitely not recommend this deck for a beginner because it really does not give you anything to visualize and to easily remember the meaning of the cards. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even give you the meaning of the cards themselves. However, then you do have a few, let's say, spreads. But what I absolutely adore is this part of the book. It's called The Crazy Unique True Saying by Giacomo Ligo. And all of this reads like almost as if it were a, let's say, a dissertation on the way in which mental illness has been seen and judged and treated and managed throughout the centuries. And it comes to the conclusion that because the Joker is the figure of the one that was employed by the king in order to make the court laugh and alleviate the tension, for example. So it had a very specific role in the Middle Ages. At the same time, it comes to the conclusion that it was the only true sane person in the court, because it was the one that was actually allowed to present the truth without any kind of filter, because it was the one that was provoking this immediate visceral reaction to the truth. So he was the one that was telling the king. There is that story about the king not wearing any clothes, and the person that points that out is seen as the fool, because he's the only one that has the courage to say that, because he's the only one that is not going to be killed if they point out that the king is actually naked. So these kind of truth and revelation and epiphanies are only allowed, let's say, to the persons that will not necessarily hurt you. They don't look like they're out there to get you. They don't look like they're relevant in a court. If you think about the role of the jokester in a court, of the jester or the joker in a court, is not of relevance. It's not an important person. They don't have any kind of responsibility. They don't have any kind of power. And I strongly believe that their salary was really low, if any. But at the same time, they were the only ones that could actually say something as outrageous as telling the king that he was naked, because that was the truth. And so they became the custodian of the truth. I love this. I love this approach to the card. When madness became a disease. And so there's a dissertation about the ways in which telling the truth has become sort of a sign of mental instability throughout the ages, which is incredibly painful, but also unfortunately very true. The Joker through the years. This one is by Pierluigi Serra, so it's a different author. But it reads really well, and I highly recommend it. So if this deck will become available mass market, of course, you may decide whether you like it or not. This is not everyone's cup of tea. But at the same time, if this book becomes available, you don't have to like the deck in order to buy the book, because I can highly recommend it. I really love the way in which we are presented the figure of the Joker. It's very, very insightful. And okay, we made it to the last deck. If you're still here, you're a trooper and you have my gratitude forever. So we're going to have a look at the last one. This is the Tarot of the Drowning World. This is also an indie deck. But the companion book is actually called Madame Loulou's Tarot du Monde Perdu by Sarah Faulkner, the guidebook to the Tarot of the Drowning World. Now, this one, I believe, is also to be purchased aside, so you have to spend additional amount of money. This is not a cheap deck, so obviously, when recommending something, I'm always very cautious in saying you need to get this deck, you need to get this book, because I don't want people to spend money. However, I have to say, if I remember correctly, this book is actually available as a PDF. So if you still want to get into this book because it is incredibly interesting, you don't want to purchase the deck, but you just want the book and you don't want to buy the actual physical copy of the book, you can still pay for it, obviously. But I believe it's very affordable, something like $15 or something like that. And you can have access to the PDF format of this book. And I highly recommend it. This, I feel absolutely no problem recommending because it's an incredibly interesting book. Let me just show you quickly the deck first. So this is a not a cheap deck, not a cheap indie deck, but there are reasons, let's say, and it is the linen finish, is the fact that it's a bigger size. This is one of the decks that I always feel like I have to say, this is not for everyone, this is not everyone's cup of tea. Just really do your research before you grab this deck, because it might be a little bit confrontational, and the reason why I'm saying it is because of cards like this. So the project, I actually followed through on Instagram when they were filming and taking photos for, in order to create this deck. So what they did, they actually found a swamp, and they put a bathtub, an older bathtub, inside the water of the swamp, in order to create a bit of a barrier and to stop the water from flowing. And then they put objects inside the bathtub that were then created this kind of fantastic scenery. I don't know. I'm trying to look for a card that will definitely tell you what happens. So in this case, you can imagine it's a larger bathtub. Then there is this person that is actually floating, and she is surrounded by all of these plants and objects, etc. And then there will be a photographer from a ladder looking down and taking a photo of this. So this is the process, let's say, of how these images are being created. I found that incredibly interesting because having a background in photography as well, I was really keen on understanding how they did it. And it was, yeah, the result is absolutely fantastic. But as I said, because these characters have their eyes closed and they're floating on water, it does remind of drowning. And as a matter of fact, this is called the Tarot of the Drowning World. So obviously you need to be okay with the theme. You need to be okay with being confronted with these images, because sometimes they will leave a mark. When I'm going to be honest about it, when you read with this deck, which is actually an excellent reader, but you will feel the mark that it leaves behind. Love the backs, by the way. But let's talk about the guidebook, because this is the reason why this deck is in this video. So this is the companion book to the tarot, and this is a veritable information on anything that goes from science to philosophy to religion to ancient history, to divination, to a number of different disciplines. It's absolutely fantastic. I read, you know, sometimes I found a card like this and I really have to turn the page immediately, or if I still want to read from it, obviously here, I would just cover it up because it is a bit confrontational. But this is amazing. I mean, there is so much description of pretty much everything. And what I like, and this is something very common in this book, for each and every card, you will feel like when you start reading the description, it starts from a very, very far away point, and you will find yourself asking yourself, why am I reading this? What am I reading this for? What am I reading? So more than 2 millennia ago, a Cumean Sibyl, the priestess who presided over the Oracle of Apollo near Naples, approached Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, then the 7th king of Rome. The Sibyl carried with her 9 books of prophecies, which she presented for sale at what Tarquinius thought an absurd price. Tarquinius laughed at the Sibyl, whom he did not take seriously, and quickly turned his attention elsewhere. The Sibyl did not budge from her position facing the king, called for a brazier, burned 3 of the books, and then offered the remaining 6 books again for the same price, and again Tarquinius declined. The Sibyl then rekindled the flames, burned 3 more of the books, and offered the remaining 3 books again for the same price. An augur, taking the auspices at that point, at last intervened, and informed Tarquinius that Rome's Pax, Fortuna, and Salus, so Pax is Latin for peace, Fortuna is Latin for luck, and Salus is Latin for health, would very much benefit from ready access to the Sibylline books, and instructed Tarquinius to purchase the remaining 3rd portion of the knowledge is being offered, while he still could, because even that salvage of the original treasure was a wise purchase. So all of this, obviously, is it necessary to understand how to read the High Priestess? No. Is it something that will represent or will give you the possibility to have a different approach to the High Priestess? For sure. Because we understand the validity of her prophecies. We understand the importance of the relationship we establish between ourselves as tarot readers and the message that is conveyed and related from the cards. We are telling the truth, and this truth, guess what, is related to Pax, Fortuna, and Salud. So it's related to peace, luck, and health. And who wouldn't want that? So we think how stupid Tarquinius was not to understand since the beginning, because originally there were 9 books. And what would have happened to the world, to us, to obviously to 2 millennia later? What would have been the outcome had Tarquinius bought the 9 books? Had the augur, or the vatus, as we say in Latin, so the person responsible for divination, had they had access to 9 books as opposed to only 3, what would have happened afterwards? Would they have known about the decline of the Roman Empire? Would I have known about the advent of Christianity, or the Muslim Empire, the Ottoman, Empire? That would have been fantastic. It is really opening up to a new world, and probably inviting you to go down the rabbit hole in understanding all of the collateral implications that come from looking at tarot this way, rather than just understanding the meaning of the cards. So it goes on talking about Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, of course, and I'm not gonna read, you're not gonna read out of that, but it does say here, for example, the symbol of the drowned world knows that wisdom will often not be immediately recognized or valued. Persuasion, strategy, and perseverance are required to reveal the truth to those who are ready for it. And even so, many will still ignore or suppress it, or turn away overwhelmed in fear or panic. And then obviously we've got also a bit of an interpretation through the eyes of medicine or poison. So we also understand that medicine is the way in which we will read the High Priestess in its upright position, and the poison is the way in which we will read it in a reverse position. This book is doing all of this for all of the majors. So you can see it here. It actually shows as a lighter gray on the edges of the book. And so it finishes up here. And then it talks about the minor arcana. Unfortunately, we don't have the same amount of information when it comes to the minor arcana. As you can see here, we only have a little bit, but we still get into the upright and reverse kind of reading or meaning of the cards. Absolutely. Well, I honestly think that this first part of the book is worth the price of at least the PDF file. If you don't want to splurge on the book, or not even on the deck, but the first part of this book on a PDF format, which is, as I said, very affordable, is really, really valid. And it's an absolutely fantastic way to approach tarot. That was it for today. A really long video, so I apologize in advance. I hope that you had a coffee with you and something to eat. And thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, you're a trooper, as I said. Have a nice day.